sometimes, which is why I'm here. But hopefully you'll enjoy it. Hopefully it'll shed a little bit of light on some of the things that we're doing and intend to do. I'll try to be concise, and then I'm completely open to questions about things I may not have addressed, or questions about things I've touched on that you'd like to delve into a little bit deeper. Anything you'd like to do, okay? So I want to start first by clarifying something, kind of explaining what we're about to talk about. We're talking about vision, which is my key contribution to this experience. And vision is different from execution. Probably all of you in your work at some point have been a part of both. And so you can probably appreciate how different they are. And they have to be, right? Vision is sort of like that prototype experience. If you ever go to a car show, you know, or any kind of conference where they're showing you what things could be, not all those things are legal, right? Not all those things are possible in that particular form, but it's very important, I believe, to stretch in that direction. And it's something that I've always been inclined to do. And, but it doesn't define the day-to-day experience precisely. It informs the day-to-day. And so my partner in this is Eileen, who is, of course, herself quite visionary. And we have a fantastic partnership because she's able to speak the language of vision and the language of execution. So she is able to take the vision that I'm going to highlight a little bit with you and put that into practice. But of course, there are very practical things that keep the vision from being exactly what it is in my head in the classroom, right? Like teachers have to be trained in things. Just because I want it to be so doesn't mean every teacher comes to us already ready to implement that. And of course, they're the key to the whole thing. So that's just one example where execution, in some ways, transforms the vision, and in some ways, slows it down in probably a very healthy way, right? Because if every crazy idea I came up with, believe me, we were implementing it every day, you would not be very happy. So it's good to have a brake pedal. It's good to have dialogue and points of view informing that. So I just want to be very clear. All the things I'm sharing with you are those things that sort of provide that fuel for what we do and where we're going. So it's good for you to know, but also appreciate the brilliance and direction that Eileen gives us and the teachers give us in hearing that vision and translating it into reality. Okay? So that's my disclaimer. So I thought, hi, good morning. I thought you might appreciate a very brief insight into where all of this came from. And it really started with my childhood. No, I'm not about to tell you about my entire childhood, but I want to highlight a couple of things because they absolutely informed the vision of what's happening here today. A key thing for me was that I grew up in a very rural part of the world, basically outside all the time. I was, for better or for worse, left alone in the woods for long periods of time, so I had a lot of time to explore by myself. I experienced quite a bit of danger, which I confronted by myself or with friends who were just as unqualified as I was to deal with it. And it was extraordinary. And I learned so much. And it really, it is in my DNA, the idea of exploration, of really loving and appreciating nature and what nature can teach us. It stuck with me all the way until my first teaching job, which was a science teacher who used nature to teach, and then now informs Battery Park Montessori, which is a nature school, which relies heavily on nature as part of its curriculum. So you can see, you know, those very early beginnings have really stuck with me. I grew up in an extremely warm, very tightly knit community. And they had their faults like any community has, but one thing that they were just in abundance was warmth and love and caring for each other regardless of who you were and whether they really knew you or not. I grew up in a culture where when you meet someone, you immediately appreciate and respect them and you embrace them. Now this did not necessarily apply to all types of people because it was a very homogenous society for the most part, but I was lucky enough to be raised by a mother who somehow did not conform to prejudice and who actually very proactively talked to me about prejudice that I might see, made me open my eyes and look at it, talked to me about what it meant to be good to all people regardless. And so I grew up in a fairly racist society, And the only reason I knew that it was racist is because my mother kept reminding me that it was racist. Because frankly, if she hadn't done that, I wouldn't have known until I was much older. And so I'll always be grateful to her because she made me look. She made me pay attention to the negative space. Do you know what I mean? The things that are not said, the things that are not done, right? Because those are the things that define institutional racism. And so I was really lucky to have that voice in my head since I was very young. And it informed a lot of my life choices later on. You might not be surprised to hear that I was very hyper as a child. Extremely hyper as a child. And now I have a son who's extremely hyper. And his ADHD, it's so funny, it took me about 3 years of looking at his ADHD to finally realize that I had that as a child. And I did not conform well to school, mainly because I had a lot of energy. I was really excited about school. I was excited about what I was learning, but I didn't want to sit down. And I still don't understand why I was expected to sit down, because there were so many ways to learn, as I proved in the woods, right? But school kept insisting that there was just one way for me to do this. I knew I was smart. I knew I was capable. I knew that I had potential because my mother reminded me on a regular basis, but the school didn't get that. And it was mainly because the forums through which I could express what I knew and what I wanted to learn were so narrow. And so as I grew, I became increasingly aware of this. It went all the way through college. I dropped out of college 4 times. Yes, 4 times. Moved to Italy, did all kinds of crazy things, and then finally just went for it and got a master's and a PhD back to back, you know? But I was really bored all the way through adulthood because I'm all about action, right? And doing and experiencing and taking those ideas that you're getting and executing something with them. So this was, the main reason for that. I had lots of exposure to intense poverty throughout my life, from the time I was a child, and then as an adult, a lot of the places that I worked for a good 15 years were some of the poorest communities in the world. And what I kept noticing, even as a child among my peers and friends, and then later internationally, was that despite incredible poverty, schools that are literally just a concrete block with no windows, no school supplies, nothing, just students and teachers, really, there was incredible potential. Everybody around me had unlimited potential. And I've always been really impressed by human potential. To this day, every human being I meet, I'm always amazed by what somebody's capable of doing. Some unexpressed potential, right? But it's just powerful to me. Despite whatever handicap, despite whatever limitation, despite whatever it is, I see people do just the most amazing things, and particularly children, who are just so unbelievably resilient. And so that stays with me a lot. When I look at each of your children, I am driven by this idea of what they could be. And I truly think it has no boundary at all. And that's super exciting for me. So that's what informs the teachers that I choose, because they've got to show me that they believe in that potential as well. Language, the last piece from the past that informs a lot of what we're experiencing today. I didn't speak anything but English. You're not surprised to hear that, right? Remember where I grew up. I mean, I didn't even know there were other languages where I grew up. And then, I think I took one class of Spanish and we made piñatas, That was our Spanish class. And we were all really impressed with ourselves for being able to say piñata. And then I met some people who immersed me in Cuban culture in Miami. American Cuban culture, I need to say. My Cuban friends would want me to specify that. So I found myself in a community that could speak English, but chose not to. And so I really had to learn something in order to communicate. And I was motivated because the food is amazing. The parties are great, right? The people are extraordinary. They had that same warmth that I grew up with. And so I began to learn. I was living in a house with a 2-year-old who was also learning, and so I learned with her. And my Spanish started with her, Spanish novellas, and Spanish radio. So I spoke with a lot of emphasis all the time, and very dramatic, And that's how I started, but I was so hooked because I felt like somebody had given me like a decoder ring, and suddenly I knew the secret code to what other people were thinking and saying in a completely different culture. It was so electric for me. This idea that I could actually cross over into another dimension, right? Where things didn't always mean the same, and jokes, you had to understand in language, and eventually you dreamt in that language. And you know, it's just really magical. And I started to travel, and then my professional opportunities expanded exponentially because of that. I worked all over Latin America because of that 2-year-old, you know? And it changed everything for me. And those of you who've heard me go on about salsa, or who have had the misfortune of seeing me dance salsa, know that it really became a thing, you know? So today I'm a salsa instructor, you know, I dance different types of salsa, I speak 4 different kinds of Spanish. I could not love it more. And it changed who I am. My DNA was transformed by that experience. And it informs why we're here today, why I chose Spanish as the launching language for the school, eventually chose to embrace Mandarin as well, because I believe that by doing that, I am offering your children passports, not just to other countries, but other dimensions of existence, right? Of completely new realms of relationships and opportunity. Not to mention that it's respectful, right? Because it says to other people, I don't think American culture is the only culture. I don't think English is the best language, right? I believe there are other valuable languages that should be spoken and understood. And it's such a wonderful show of respect. And I think we just need so much of that right now. We need people who show respect and openness to other culture. So that's why it's so important to me. Okay, you won't be surprised after hearing the origin piece why these things are so important. Because as a child, I really wanted voice, right? And I felt that I didn't have voice. It was a little loud. I can appreciate why not everyone wanted to hear it, but I wanted voice. I wanted to say something about how I was learning. I was excited about it. I wanted ownership of it. And as I grew and as I worked as a teacher, I began to appreciate how oppressed most children are. Really, if you stop to think for a minute about the average child's day, how many choices do they really have? Like, start with wake up this morning to the moment that you said goodbye. How many choices did they really have? Probably very few. And then throughout the day in a traditional school, you can expect them to have almost none, right? The curriculum's been decided. What we're gonna learn's been decided. How we're gonna learn's been decided, right? And so we're raising kids in this culture where we basically teach them to be powerless and voiceless right from the beginning. What on earth do we expect when they become adults? We expect a magical transformation. Suddenly they're going to say, oh, well, I'm this age now, so now I can't. No, they're so practiced at being obedience and compliance, right? That all of their voice muscles are flaccid. One of the reasons I think we do this, and I dive into this, I've written a book for those of you who are interested called The 3 Ps of Parenting, and power is one of the Ps. Read the book, and I write about power because I think a lot of us are afraid of power. People are afraid of children who have power. And I can appreciate why that is. There are times when I'm a little afraid of my son. But I think that if we look at it a little differently, step back and ask ourselves, what are we really afraid of? You know? Is it really that we think they're going to do something wrong with that power? Do we think they're born with those wrong inclinations? You know, there's this whole educational theory, lots of educational theorists argue about whether children are born with the right intentions or the wrong intentions, you know? Do we have to train them to be civilized, right? And some would argue that yes, we do. They're born very primal and we have to fix them. And I'm going to talk about recess soon, and there is some evidence to that. But when it's you and your child, I would argue that you might see more positive things if you step back and you invite a little more choice, a little more power. But that's very much part of the vision of the school. The belief that if children are supported in having choice about what they're doing, and there's facilitation around their agency, you'll see some really stunning things from them. And so what Eileen and the teachers and Battery Park parents hear from me constantly I look at every single transaction of the day. There's not a single moment of the day that I take for granted. So when I see them walking from class to music, I ask, are they in charge? Do they have power? Or are you just corralling them because you want to control them as they move from one place to another? Do you know what I mean? It's even in those subtle moments. At lunch, they're in the process of learning to develop, run their own lunch experience. Not because we don't want to run it for them, but because we'd like for them to have power and agency. It's in those transactional moments sometimes when it matters the most, because it really means something. When they're having to set up for themselves, you're saying to them, yes, you are completely capable of doing this. We'll help you, we'll give you ideas and suggestions, but this is not rocket science, This is something that you can do. I think that one of the things that we don't often give children, maybe we don't pay enough attention to, is the unique power of their thinking. Children up until the age of 6, for example, you've heard us, I think, talk about the brain science in that particular phase and how plastic thought is. By that meaning it's so malleable, right? The brain is just growing at this incredible rate. It's one of the reasons we encourage you to introduce languages early. Those of you who do things like ski or ice skating or, any sport really, that's a great window to introduce those skill sets because the brain just can take just about anything. Doesn't mean you should overwhelm your child, but it's a great window. And to me, that means this is really important at that age because I want to hear what that thinking is. I don't want to shut it down. I don't want the child to ever feel corralled or like they have to always have a brake pedal on waiting for my cue. It's particularly important to me in this phase because of plasticity of thought, because I want to hear everything that has to offer. I'm going to connect this to technology in just a little bit, and the reasons that I promote introducing technology even at a young age, because I think there's an important connection. So what I say to parents about this, or to teachers actually, is one of my most effective strategies as a teacher was to step back, and I called it the bubble. I would step back and watch the students together as if they were in this fishbowl, or a bubble. And I practiced it as a mother too. It was very effective. It was hard to do in the beginning, but especially if you have siblings, I can imagine how incredibly hard it is. But get some distance from that experience and watch what happens. Really watch and understand what your child's behavior is without you interfering. And after you feel like you've given your child an opportunity to show you what they do without you micromanaging them, I think you're on the path to better understanding that. I know you didn't come here to get a parenting lecture, so I'm not going to go there any longer, but I want you to understand some of the things that really inform how much Eileen and I emphasize this element of the program. Connected to this, the entire school was built to invite your children to feel like they're part of a dialogue. By this I mean the world dialogue, right? Because all around your kids, things are happening. Important things, crazy things, right? The world is just so crazy right now. And we're all talking about it. And they are listening to those conversations. They're absolutely paying attention to that. They're picking up bits and pieces, but often they don't feel invited to be a part of that. But they 100% deserve to be a part of that. They're citizens just like everyone else. In some ways, children are some of the most oppressed people in the world, right? Because they don't really have voice and choice. And they're subjected to and impacted by things that go on around them, but no one really expects them to be in the conversation about it. Sometimes we do it out of a sense of protection, which I address, that's one of the pieces, by the way. But sometimes our protection is a handicap. Sometimes it's actually an oppression. Because what really liberates the child is the invitation to be in there. And so even when I picked the school, I thought about those big windows. One of the things I loved was that they look out into a plaza. So many schools, when you walk by, you have to ask yourself, is that a prison or a school? I can't tell, right? No windows, there's bars sometimes, right? In fact, some people don't know, the schools from the turn of the century were actually built based on prison design. Like, many elements of them were borrowing from prison design. Because we think about children sometimes that way. We want to protect them from the world, cut them off, don't want anyone seeing them. We got to keep them safe. We don't want them seeing anybody else. We don't want them seeing anything bad, you know. We don't want them to see somebody smoking on the sidewalk as we walk by, you know. But that's a very real thing. I mean, that's just a thing that happens in the world, you know. So I built the school very purposefully. I chose it for these big, huge windows. And for me, invite our kids to look out, to wave at people on the plaza, to communicate, to feel connected. I want them to feel connected. And it's the reason that I really push for the kids to go out as much as possible when they're ready. And when Eileen feels that it's safe, Eileen, trained by Israeli Defense Force, not going to let them out until they're ready, of course, right? That's the wonderful partnership we have. No one could be safer in this school. But I am pushing for that. Remember the vision versus, execution piece, right? The push is get out there and be in the conversation. Learn what's happening in the world. See it for yourself. You have a right to know, right? We're not going to censor everything for you. We want you to be involved. So that's a big part of what's going on with that. You can appreciate now, thinking about me climbing trees and the travel experience that Spanish initially gave me, travel in itself, the just incredibly moving experience of going places in the world and seeing people do things in a very different way and realizing that all those assumptions I had made in my very narrow, homogenous society weren't necessarily true anywhere else. That was very transformative, and so it informs the vision behind this school. I believe that children should have lots of authentic and electrifying, inspiring experiences. And I don't think most of those can happen inside a building. I think the best ones happen out there. And I think it's probably stating the obvious, but if you're feeling hesitancy about that, I encourage you to think about any travel experience you have, where you really, not like the destination hotel, like, we've been there, right? I don't know if that's really travel, but you know what I mean. When you've been to a place where things were not the way you're used to it, maybe it even felt a little uncomfortable. Maybe you didn't necessarily love the way the food tastes, but it was different, made you think. The customs were different. Maybe the bathrooms were weird, maybe, I don't know, right? The customs, the sanitary conditions, whatever. But it got you thinking, and it changed your basic assumptions. At least that happened to me numerous times. And each time it happened, I came back a different person. And what I noticed in those travel experiences is that it was very fast. One day of travel felt more transformative to me than an entire year of college. I can tell you scientifically a few reasons that is. There's actually been studies about this, so we know that the brain does change when you travel in really interesting ways. It becomes more complex. You have more creative power. Have you ever felt that when you come back from a trip? Like, do you ever feel, I think some of us think, well, we traveled so we got away from what we're used to, but there's something that actually happened in your brain when you travel that changes your creative ability and capacity. It's fascinating. If you're ever interested, I can send you some studies. So this got me thinking as a grad student and teacher, and I was developing the first schools, and I actually built a travel school where most of the year the kids were on long trips that had themes. So we went to Santiago de Chile, we lived in a children's burn center, and we volunteered. We traveled all throughout South America. The curriculum was anchored in that region, but of course touched on tons of different things. These were kids, by the way, who had never left their neighborhood. They were kind of like me. They had never left the 5 square blocks they'd grown up in. And boy, did their assumptions about themselves and their potential change completely after having that experience. I really believe that this should be true for all kids. And I think that we live in a city that was just built for that, So one of the reasons that I decided to get back into the school building game is because I felt like we had this opportunity in New York with this building in one of the most historic spots in the world to offer kids a launch pad into these experiences. And so Eileen and I talk regularly about vision to execution, realistic ways to invite the kids to have real experiences, that you'll have that kind of a parallel experience to travel. Because in New York, you could travel kind of without getting on a plane, right? Just hop the subway and bam, you're in a completely different country for a day. So I think we should be taking advantage of that. And if you hear us talk about school without walls and really pushing this idea of getting out of the building, this is what's driving it. Those are the ideas that are driving. I want to talk a little about our thoughtful school design. So this covers a few random bits and pieces. I was trying to think of a way to kind of put these pieces under an umbrella. So Eileen wanted me to be sure I touched on a couple of things that parents have asked us about specifically. Because we do things a little differently here. And so I want to address some of those program pieces, our lunch, our approach to lunch, the assemblies that we do, recess. I think she's been asked about recess a few times. And I would comment on transitions, which I've mentioned before. So by thoughtful school design, I mean, we haven't taken anything for granted. It was very important to me when we launched the school that we think about every transaction, because I don't think any moment of your child's day should be taken for granted. When they're walking from their main class to music, something's happening. It's important. They're being communicated with. They're being sent messages about their ability, about their relationship to their friends, about navigation. There's all kinds of things happening. So thoughtful means nothing gets overlooked. Let's start with recess, since I know that's important to you. I've been asked a few times, why don't you do recess like other schools? Well, back when I was doing my master's at Teachers College, I got really interested in recess. I don't know about you. I had horrific experiences in recess as a child. Not every single recess, but I would say most of them. And I was a nice kid. I was, hyper, as I mentioned, but I was a nice kid. I didn't really rock the boat with anybody, and I'm pretty adaptable, so I kind of hang with whoever happens to be around. But I was bullied a lot. I don't know why I attracted that. I'm a huge girl. I always was a huge girl, but bullies just love to pick on me. So I didn't have a lot of positive experiences in recess, and so I think I was interested in looking at it at Teachers College, because I was curious to see what it looked like as an adult. And at Teachers College, as you're doing your practicums and building your expertise, they send you to schools all over the city. So you get this wonderful chance to see every kind of school, public, private, rich neighborhood, poor neighborhood, etc. So you get to see pretty much everything. And I noticed some really consistent themes in recess, which was this sort of Lord of the Flies, beta, alpha experience. And almost every experience, even if teachers were managing it lightly, there was a sort of primal default that kids fell into. There were alpha kids who would dominate the movement experiences. They usually owned whatever equipment was available. And there were beta kids who just kind of submitted to whatever might be happening. And it wasn't specific to male or female. There were, alphas and betas in both. And that was really consistent, and it was unsettling. It was really unsettling, because then what I noticed in observing these schools is that those relationships carried over into the classroom. So whoever established themselves as alphas in recess tended to carry that into the classroom and dominate there. And I saw progression over the course of a year. So I saw the alpha who established presence in recess early become increasingly so everywhere over the course of that year. And this was across all kinds of teacher competencies, so it really didn't seem to matter how good the teacher was. What seemed to matter was that there was no structure, right? Because kids were basically submitting themselves to an experience that wasn't guided by any wisdom at all. Now, remember we talked about power, right? This is that example where I think power needs some facilitation. And so when Eileen and I launched the school, we talked very proactively about what we wanted to do here, because we both agreed that traditional recess is destructive for children. And we wanted to do it right. And now you have the ACT program, which is getting rave reviews. It took us some time to get to land on that. We tried a few other things that didn't quite work. But that one seems to be here for the long term, because that gives children choice and agency. It gives them community with like-minded fellows of different points of view that change on a regular basis. And it provides that kind of wonderful facilitation from the teachers, right? It's gentle, it's somewhat casual compared to the classroom, but it provides a little drop of that maturity and wisdom and oversight that helps create a nice balanced and healthy environment. We're very happy with that alternative. But that's a great example of why we think of this as thoughtful school design. We didn't just do recess because it's always been done, and I can't tell you, this is my 24th school, 22 of them I helped other people do. I can't tell you how many times I sat at the table so excited to develop a brand new school from scratch with no assumptions. And the first question would be like, where are we going to put the smart boards? You know, like, where is the teacher going to stand, right? Like starting with these really turn-of-the-century assumptions about school design, when you don't have to do that anymore. You can challenge those, you can rethink all those. And I was very lucky to have a partner like Eileen who is willing to do that. Lunch, as I mentioned before, we invite students to manage it themselves. Why? Because by doing that, they're very present, they're mindful. They're thinking about what they're doing, how they're doing it, what they're eating, how they're treating each other, how they're managing the space that they're in, right? It's important. We want them to be really aware. We can't send them different messages at lunch than we send them in the classroom. We can't tell them in the classroom, you've got agency, and we expect you to be accountable and responsible and collaborate, and then bring them into the lunchroom and say, all rules are off. Teachers are going to be your waiters today, you know. What will you have, sir? Right? Like, we can't, it doesn't make any sense. It makes everything disingenuous. And so we're trying to be very consistent with those practices. Transitions, the same things I mentioned before. And assembly. You've noticed that we have made more changes to assembly this year and kicked you out. And I don't know if you've watched the videos. It's so powerful. Have you seen? Have you guys been watching? It's amazing. The way that they interact with each other, and facilitate each other, and invite each other to have voice. And with each week they have, they get more, like lean into it a little bit more. It's just really inspiring. And I have to give Eileen, the teachers, credit for that, because execution is everything, right? It's one thing for me to say, hey, I think the kids should run their own assembly, right? But it's a completely different ballgame to make that happen. And I think if you're watching the videos, hopefully you're seeing what I'm seeing, which is just an incredibly powerful voice that the kids have in the most positive possible way and across ages, which is so lovely to see the older ones facilitating the younger ones. So very happy with how that's going. I want to briefly comment on learning for purpose. I wasn't sure if I should even, for me this feels really obvious, but I just want to say, I didn't build a school to compete with anybody. I didn't build a school for competitive kids. I don't care if they beat somebody out for something later on. I really am not into that. I don't think the world needs competitors right now. I think the world needs collaborators. The world needs people who know why they're doing things. And I think the world needs people who have purpose, who are thinking about making a contribution somehow. And I don't pretend to define what that contribution is, but I think it should be a contribution of some kind. I'm just so tired of seeing schools serve a philosophy of, winning. Like, it's just not about winning. It really, we don't have time to think about winning, I think we only have time to think about making things better and healthier and more loving and respectful. I just don't see how we have time for anything else. And so I'm really insistent on this, that this is what this school is here for. And the only families we want in this school are families who are really driven by this idea. Because I think we need to look at each other on left and right and know the person sitting beside us shares a commitment to this. I think that's really important. So in our admissions, which I'm guiding very closely for this purpose, I'm really careful about that. And I think those of you who have been super generous as parent ambassadors have heard that from me. That we're looking never to sell this school, but to find the families who believe in this. So I wanted to just kind of say that out loud. I believe in disruption. I think it's important to kind of be a troublemaker sometimes. I'm okay encouraging your children to be troublemakers. For purpose, for good, right? But I like the idea of disruption. I find it really titillating. And I think that we're in an era, your kids are growing up in generations for whom this is just a default. So I certainly don't want to fight it, you know? And I'm not mad that it's a trend. Love the idea of questioning everything, challenging everything. So you can expect a lot more of that throughout the elementary school and certainly in the middle school, which is a great disruption age, right? We intend to really encourage that. I don't know how many of you have seen my blog called Parenting for the Future or seen my presentation. It was okay. It was probably a little long. But it certainly hit all the points that I wanted to hit. It's on our YouTube channel. If you have, if you want to put yourself to sleep one night, feel free to watch it. I won't be upset. You'll catch a few salient points before you doze off. I try to hit the good ones first. I'm not a gatekeeper with technology. I wasn't as a teacher. I am not as a parent. There's a book that has become kind of my Bible for now. It's called The Inevitable. And if you haven't read it, I can't encourage you strongly enough to read it. It was written by the first editor of Wired magazine, who happens to also be a super analog guy who does these really cool creative projects and bikes across the country. So while he's wildly tech, he's the guy responsible. Did you see Minority Report, the movie? Mm-hmm. The swiping thing? That was him. Way before that was a thing, right? So he visioned that way before it was a thing. So he's written this really lovely book with a positive attitude about tech, and he tries to predict where these things are going to go over the next 30 to 50 years. And as a parent, I feel that you owe it to yourself to read it, even if all that happens is you become aware of his point of view, and maybe it gets you reading other things and makes you a little more woke about technology, because it's just time to get your head out of the sand if you're that person, okay? Not saying you're that person, but if you're that person who focuses on screen time, okay? I know your friend at the playground is judging you. I know you're getting judged everywhere. I know, I am too. We judge each other, right? We censor each other because we're fearful, mainly. But it's just time to stop, because AI is here. Your kids are going to grow up in this really complex world. You can't parent them if you don't have your eyes open about what that world is going to look like. And so that's why I'm saying this to you. And that is why this school will embrace the future. Not because I want your kids to be cyborgs, It doesn't go with anything I said, does it? Remember the girl who climbed the trees and the girl who was like the hippie about purpose, right? That same girl believes that your children should be outfitted with wisdom and tools and knowledge so that they can make a contribution and so that they're protected against intense consumerism, because that's where it's headed, right? Like AI is going to get in everything, and of course it's going to be a consumer engine, right? So I can see that coming, and I want you to be in a position to protect your children, and one of the best ways to protect them is to get them behind the wheel so that they can design their own, so that they can question the ethics of design, so that they understand. They're already touching VR and AR and AI. They're already touching nanoscience. They're already thinking about quantum computing, because that's going to be a really big thing, right? And I know it may feel overwhelming because you have, a couple of other things you have to do, like raise them, and your job, sorry, but you just don't have a choice. And I want the school to be your partner. So what Eileen and the teachers are all hearing, and Eileen is my partner in this, is we've got to embrace it and walk towards it, not wait. And so all of our teachers are on personalized tech PD plans to take their own pathways to growing and understanding technology, even the preschool teachers. Because we need awareness to start early, right? Doesn't mean we're going to put computers and devices in children's hands, but we want the awareness to be there so that all the teachers can be of one mind and one language in supporting their growth in that. But you can expect quite a bit of ambition. That means, practically, yes, I expect all children to be coding very early. Around 5 and 6, I expect children to understand what coding is, to understand the language, to speak it as a language, to embrace it, and to feel fluid with it. Because even if your child never uses code, they're going to have to work with people who use code. And they are empowered when they speak it, right? So that's why I think that is just fundamentally important. The other things that I feel are part of embracing the future are sustainability and climate change. Another area that's going to define our children's lives and feels really heavy to me sometimes, you know? I think about it all the time, and I swear, like every time it occurs to me, because it occurs to me every single time I use anything or throw anything away or buy anything, I think about what should I do as a parent, what should I do as the driver of vision. It feels heavy, but then if you allow yourself to explore what's being done about it out in the world, it's amazing. I mean, the inventions that are possible now because of technology. And another area that I'm pushing is biomimicry, or where you copy designs from nature in designing solutions to deal with climate. And there are hundreds out there that are just awe-inspiring. And these are natural environments for children to find interest, right? Nature, naturally fascinating to children. Technology, naturally fascinating to children. So for me, again, it brings in potential and opportunity more than it feels like a weight. Our job is to support you in these things, right? But we have to know that you want it, right? That you're with us, right? Because we can't swim against the tide. So we have to have families here who really believe in these things and who are cheerleading us and urging us to go on, and at home are, you know, echoing this message. Yes, you should learn technology. Yes, you should learn coding. Yes, you should pay attention to climate change. Yes, you can do something about it. What's happening in school, we support 100%. Let's change one thing that we do in the house to reflect our appreciation for this mission, right? It goes such a long way. I need you to do those things, because otherwise we're not going to get them where we need to get them in the time that we need to get them there. I believe most schools still have their head in the sand about this. I believe most schools are in extreme denial about what's coming. We will never be best. Never. It's irresponsible to you, right? But I do believe that. When I tour my friends' schools, I want to say, you know, one-to-one iPad is not going to get them where they need to go for the world that's coming. And why aren't you talking about climate change, especially at the older age groups, right? Okay, so those are, sorry, I'm pointing at this because I put a few cue cards here to make sure that I didn't forget anything. The middle school, briefly. In short, it is an expansion of these themes, right? We're not going to go off track from what we've already built. The elementary school is just glimmering. It's beautiful design. We're seeing really fantastic things come out of that. The middle school will expand on those. Key things that will be added start with travel. Going back to, you know, I'm drawing from those experiences that I had and what I believe makes for some of the most powerful learning. So 2 weeks of travel each year. Eileen and I believe in the first few years we're looking at Central America for the first trip, South America for the second, and Spain for the third. And then by that time, I think we'll start to see, I think that's when Mandarin starts to pull in, and of course travel will then start to go to Mandarin-speaking locations, right? But in the first few years, Spanish will be the other language in the middle school. That travel will always have purpose. There'll be a very clear reason that we're there, and a lot of the curriculum that builds up to that will support the experiences that that trip brings to fruition. It will be a human experience. We expect students to make human connections, build relationships that they can continue on later. do something, put their hands on something, and make a difference wherever it is they go, but not in a token way, right? It has to be authentic. And of course, they'll have a lot of voice and agency around what that is. And of course, there will be layers of learning. Eileen's beautiful transdisciplinary approach, always. Those are things that will continue. Transdisciplinary, we have fought for, and I can't tell you how hard that is, because at the middle school level, a lot of people start expecting you to silo the disciplines out, right? Let's separate math, let's separate history, let's separate everything, because that's the way it's always been done. No one can explain why that's better. They just usually say that's always the way it's been done. But we're not going that route. So we will continue with the transdisciplinary route. We'll continue to monitor how they're doing in terms of skills and knowledge areas in all of those disciplines, just the way that we've done before. Right? But we will keep those connections going, because if they were ever important, they're so incredibly important in that moment of middle school. A very important element of middle school will be nurture, because they're babies all over again. Okay? Anybody have middle schoolers? No, okay. So the babies, yeah. Babies all over again. It's a completely new identity phase. It's a lot like the twos, I'm sorry. Except they're really bold and aggressive and, want their rights and emotional. Very much like the twos in that sense, because they're redefining who they are. And so a school that supports those children has to be hypersensitive to social emotional needs. In fact, I would say it has to be our #1 priority. Ever heard of that Maslow's hierarchy? Maslow is a theorist, education theorist, and so he argued that there's a hierarchy of need, and if the foundation is not set, then the rest can't be built. And the foundation is basically social emotional. So like a child going through a crisis of some kind, a loss maybe, you can't expect literacy skills to be developed on top of that, right? So in middle school, we pay close attention to that, make sure that that foundation is really solid. And the recruitment is challenging, because you're looking for middle school specialists who understand the science of middle school children, the cognitive science of middle school children. And we're in that process right now. Some important themes that will continue will be STEM. You can expect full integration of STEM. By that I mean everyone knows how to use 3D printers. Everyone's using augmented reality. They're probably doing chemistry labs, DNA study, dissecting everything using augmented and virtual reality. Because you can literally engage everything using those tools. And guess what? You don't need a chemistry lab to do that, right? And you can still have the same experimentation. You can still have errors in your process. You can still simulate what you're doing, but most of that will happen in that manner. And I don't know if anyone saw that we posted on social media recently. I let the upper elementary experiment with one of the tools that I plan to bring in. It's called Z-Space, and it's this incredible augmented reality that lets you explore pretty much every subject ever. And you can pull it off the screen, so you're wearing these little glasses, and you can literally pull the atom off the screen and move it around and change the protons and see what happens. And it looks like it's floating in space in front of you. Everybody who puts the glasses on swipes at it like this to try and touch it. This is embracing the future, right? The tools that can empower your children. You can expect us to start introducing the idea of quantum physics, because that is a very important thing. I dive deep into it in one of my blog posts. I encourage you to become aware of it, because you want to guarantee that your child is that's a great place to go. There will be a huge need and a huge deficit, and it is a fascinating realm. Everything will touch technology in some way. It doesn't mean that it is all about technology. It goes back to what I said before. I want your children to be equipped with the right tools so that they are ready and they're mindful about them. What's very important to us is a well-rounded experience. We don't know what your child wants to contribute or how. Maybe they're artistic, maybe they're athletic, maybe theater is their thing. We don't know. So we will provide a rounded exposure to the arts and to sports and to teamwork, most important, because it's very consistent with who we are. Other things that are not part of our primary purpose, like a full drama program, We will work to build those with partners, but there are no guarantees about what that will look like for the middle school, especially in the early years. It is not our intent to have a full drama program as part of the day, ever. It's not our intent to have a full music program as part of the day, ever. It is our intent to build partnerships through which we can expose your children and invite them to go that route if that's the way that they'd like to go, and support that individualized pathway. And these are things that we have to work out and build in the middle school year by year as we grow. We've got an active partnership growing with Pace University, for example. So we started that 2 years ago. Now it's at the place where our elementary students can go and see backstage at the Schimmel Performing Arts Center, which is world famous. And we have this ongoing dialogue with the staff at Pace. There's an experimental theater down the street that does really amazing things. I don't know if you've been following that, but kids have gone there a few times. So those are examples of those partnerships. As we grow staff in the middle school, it will help us build partnerships with music entities, athletics entities, others who can help support those explorations and help us provide a rounded exposure. And then we'll watch our children very carefully to see where they're leading. Where do they want to go? How can we nurture that pathway? Sometimes it will manifest after school. Sometimes it will be team sports after school because that's what they really want to do. Sometimes it will be a focus on violin, and we'll really nurture that. Everything in their program will nurture that, right? As we see them evolve and flower. But our primary themes for the middle school and for this school will continue to be purpose, right? Embracing the future, sustainability and climate change, awareness and attention to that, and development of incredibly strong STEM skills and STEM ownership, engineering, innovation, on the front edge of what those things are. Those will be important themes that will continue. Okay? So, that's, I think, those are the highlights. Eileen, did I miss anything that you feel was really important in this? Okay, questions? What can I tell you? Yes?
I have a question. For the elementary school, I mean, because I guess it's not panned out yet, we're going into that here.
For the middle school?
For the elementary school, I feel like, you know, there's no, currently, there's not one grade, you know, for the older elementary, they're grouped together right now. And the plan is to go out each grade.
Yes.
Regarding physical PE, how is that going to look like for them? Is there a gym facility?
Always going to be just what it is right now. Once a week, they'll go to the athletic center where they do swimming, basketball, volleyball, racquetball. What else do they do?
Those are the ones we've been doing now. I mean, we can always add.
It will. We don't have any plans to change that. Do you want? Are you aware of the other movement activities that they have besides?
No, I was just. I mean, growing up in a public school, PE was a big part of it.
Yes.
And I feel, especially with, I have a son and a daughter, but especially with just.
And here they go out regularly into the city. That's a really important part of their movement. They go out and explore the world instead of that PE time.
Also act classes that like dance or
Right. The ACT classes, the beauty of the ACT classes, it's like a flex program because you have choice. If that's what you want, right? Because I don't know about you, but I had PE classes I wasn't always thrilled to go to. Sometimes I loved it, sometimes I didn't. But what's nice about ACT is that the child can choose.
And how often do they do these
Eileen, when does it change? Every trimester?
Today is the second active is today.
active? Is that like once a week or?
so every day. So they
It's
Sorry,
every
yeah,
day.
ACT happens every day.
But
But
it's-
when does the choice? when you change?
It's by trimester, and we just finished trimester 1. Act 2 begins today until March, and then there'll be a third.
Yeah, but it's every day. And so you can include kind of a PE equivalent. They'll go to Imagination Playground. I think there are other outdoor.
There's lots of
Yeah.
there's
active
ballet and
Ballet, yoga.
flamenco, hip hop.
Every Monday is my daughter. Yoga, Tuesday is Minecraft, Wednesday is different thing. Every day they choose.
Yeah.
So it's kind of you.
Maybe I should probably do a little more like informational stuff on
That
apps?
would be
Maybe
great,
I'm not
because
knowledgeable
preschool
about it.
parents and choose are,
Yeah.
like, we've heard of it, like, through the pipeline.
Ah, I
Some
didn't know.
kindergarten
Okay,
parents,
no,
okay.
yeah.
but because it's not an element
Got
for the
it.
younger
Okay.
kids.
Got it.
So it's not an
It's a
element.
vague awareness that we have.
I got it.
That's from kindergarten.
Done. I will correct that.
So currently preschool, they're not pre-K and under, they're not getting that programs from kindergarten.
What is their recreation for preschool, Eileen?
4-year-olds go out for walks every single day, and if they don't go out because it's raining, then they do the movement room, they do some activity. And 3-year-olds rest.
Yeah.
Is that true of like the next 3-4 class?
3-4s also, Eileen?
No, they rest.
Okay, because like I think my 4-year-old gets to go to like the gym, but I don't think he gets outside. or
Yeah,
not
they,
gym, but,
yeah,
like,
because
it's different.
next year the 3s and 4s will be completely
Yeah.
separated, and 4s will all go out. But this year it's only the junior kids.
And that was very purposeful. Again, I chose this location. This is an incredibly historic place. We are right next to where our entire governmental system was designed. You know, that's just that's the tip of the iceberg of this neighborhood. And so one of the things I've asked Eileen and teachers to do is to make a regular part of their experience in this school getting out, not just for recreation, that's important, but to couple that with awareness building about where they are and the importance of where they are. So we take it for granted sometimes, don't we? I mean, we're rushing around trying to get things done, maybe taking for granted that we live in old New York City. There are lots of people like that. You know, so I don't want our kids to be that. I want our kids to really be mindful of that, to learn about it. It's an opportunity, right? So many families worldwide would love to have this opportunity for their kids to learn in this environment. So I want us to really take advantage of it. Yes.
Talking about that, the circumstances of each family might make people move around, leave the city, leave other places, etc. What can we do to help the kids if we have to move them to a more traditional schooling approach, or even down the road when they're going to go to high school and so on?
It's funny,
Are there things we can do to help them?
Right, it's a great question. Everyone heard his question? If the child goes to a traditional school, maybe if they travel, how can we help them transition? So I get asked this a lot at the Montessori school, because a lot of parents ask, well, when they leave a Montessori environment, how do they do in other schools? And the thing is, we're already getting them ready for that because of the voice and agency, right? What you want in another school, especially a traditional school, where everyone is asked to do the same thing at the same time, you need a student who can advocate for themselves, either because they're struggling with something or because they would like more, right? Maybe they want it to be a little more challenging or interesting. Maybe they'd like to dive deeper into a subject area. What we're building here are self-advocates. You see it at the parent conferences, right? When they're guiding you through the parent conference and talking about their own learning. What we're doing is setting up their expectation to always have a voice in that process. So in any school, they're outfitted for that, right? What you can do to support them is to apply the critical thinking exercises that you're in now, right? Because as a parent in high street school, it's different, isn't it? You're not policing a worksheet. Anybody ever had that experience where you're trying to police homework just to get it done? And you know that here, that's not something you're asked to do. But you are asked to model for your child and help your child use critical thinking in an exercise, right? So that's a wonderful application of that. If you set up that protocol here, it will make sense if you go to a traditional school because you'll want to ask critical questions about how things are done and the subject area that you're exploring. So you're sort of already self-equipped for enrichment in that situation. You know what I mean? In terms of performance, they're not going to have a problem. There's a very good chance they will be a grade level ahead of wherever it is that you go because of the fact that in the classroom there is no wall, right? There's no grade limit to what they're learning in that situation. So in most cases, you're in a really good place. As long as you continue, a lot of it's about you, right? If you take your child to a traditional setting from here, I think it's just important, if you believe in their voice, it's important that you continue to believe in their voice, right? Just because the school may not be there yet, doesn't mean you suddenly change shirts, do you know what I mean? They need to see that you're wearing the same shirt, that it wasn't just, right, it wasn't temporary. That's, I think, hopefully that's helpful. I don't want to leave you hanging without a real solution, but that's how I would approach it. That is how I have approached it with my family.
I know school's just launching the middle school, thinking your parents. What is your vision for high school, and maybe even thinking about getting them to college? What are the class sizes? My husband and I are trying to figure out, because he went.
Wait a second, how old is your child right now?
4.
Eileen, you ready to talk about high school?
I could talk generally about high school, but not about our plans for high school.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about high school. Let's assume for right now there is no high school. Let's assume that. I think those who know me well know that that's not true in my head, but I think it's healthy for us to just stop at 8th grade right now in terms of conversation. We're getting them ready for college right now, right? Because what do they need to be in college? They need to be self-advocating. They need to have voice. They need to be thoughtful about their own path and direction, particularly if there's college when your child gets there. And I'm sorry to tell you, I really don't think there will. But 2, if there is college when your child gets there, it will certainly be an entrepreneurial experience. And so what your child will need to have is an intense level of entrepreneurship outfitted with an advanced level of STEM. That I can tell you with no doubt whatsoever. And so everything you heard me talk about is actually, with my mind very clearly focused on your child as a functioning adult. In fact, there's nothing I've said here tonight. Tonight? Is it already night? Did I talk that long? It's such a Monday. There's nothing that I haven't said here that wasn't from the place of imagining your child as a contributing adult, right? It's one of the reasons that I keep pushing this book, The Inevitable. I don't mean to be cultish about it. I really don't. I rarely read a book that I feel offers that much value. This one offers tremendous value as a parent in seeing what your child's future might look like. Because we are going to have to parent very differently than our parents parented us. So the models that we have to reference, I would argue, are almost useless to me. I'm sorry to be so extreme and extra about it, but it's such a different world, guys. It's such a different world. Everything different. So I think ethically, yes, of course, we're drawing from really important places that are rooted in how we were raised. Of course, that's valuable and important. But I'm just talking about how we help navigate the ocean, right? I'm just not sure that our parents' navigational approach is going to help us in helping our own children. So I'm not sure that the oceans are going to look the same, you know? So I think it's fine to be thinking about that now. I would say additionally to that while I personally don't think college will exist the way that we all know it when your 4-year-old is there, I actually think it's going to be pushed earlier. So what we think about as college, I think, will happen much sooner, and will be a much more dynamic global campus. It's super exciting, you know? But I wouldn't put all my eggs in the Harvard basket. Because even Harvard has gone virtual and global. Harvard and MIT Stanford, Harvard, MIT were the first ones to launch the virtual classrooms. You may think it was University of Phoenix, but it wasn't. Sorry to say. And they're not stupid, right? Because they knew where it was going to go. And they did that for money, of course. And now they have millions of students globally taking classes at all 3 places. And now almost every prestigious university in the world has adopted that same format, right? And that's just today. That just happened since 2004, I think. and it's just going to accelerate. So that's where I'm drawing from, right? I'm not just making up some weird, Dianetics thing. Yes?
Could you please expand a little bit on the use of technology in preschool, or give an example of how to envision that?
Actually, this week, when's the Learning Beautiful thing come out? This week? Yeah, I think it's this week. So, we just launched a partnership with this designer from MIT who designed Montessori tools to teach early computational thinking, such as coding, etc. And the company's called Learning Beautiful, and they are beautiful. The tools are just breathtaking. And they comply with the Montessori guidelines for aesthetics and independent use, etc. So both schools will start use of these in the new year, and I have a message going out about it this week, some things like that. And the designer is going to do some workshops for parents with those, and that will be a fantastic example for how we're introducing those concepts early. I think Eileen and I are pretty aligned around the idea that we don't want wires and devices in the preschool. What we want is engineering, right? We want early coding practices, so introduction of concepts around coding, such as through the use of these tools. Is there anything else specific that you want to drop, Eileen?
Just design thinking. So when they're doing projects, they plan ahead and backwards design. So if they want to make something, what do they need? How do they plan it out? So that design thinking will then go very well into the
Yeah, design thinking, because it's so important to us to divert kids from the consumer path. It's so, I'm a little obsessive about it, because if I'm afraid of anything in the future, it is the consumer trap in technology. Really, I'm worried about that. Huh?
Consumer trap, I was buying the book.
Oh. Yeah, so it's very important to me that we that we lock in early the idea of their ownership of tech, that they can invent their own, that they can build their own, they can break it open, they can question how it's designed, And so I think the powerful place for that starts there with preschool, through design. So yeah, and you'll see, when you see these Learning Beautiful tools, I think it'll also make that more crystallized. I'm so excited about it. And the designer, she's this beautiful, math art brain, right? And just passionate about what she's doing, about inviting children to explore computation in a really hands-on, interactive, non-device way. It's really beautiful.
Do we plan to have bilingual immersion stuff at first grade?
Oh, no. So, yeah, we'll keep going with the same approach to language. Eileen, do you want to comment on any changes at middle school level?
No, it will be very similar to what we do in the elementary school,
Yeah.
but more small group work around, because there'll be 2 levels of language. There'll be our kids who've gone through with fluency, and then there'll be new children coming in, and they will be accommodated alongside.
Okay. Is it going to be the 1 day and 1 day program?
That design will change a little bit, and this coming year, we're doing what we call a soft start for the middle school, and we're using that as our beta to experiment with things a little bit. I'm sure Eileen's going to be tinkering with the language approach just a bit. It depends so much on who's in it, right? If they're native speakers versus non-native, so that's going to take a little bit of tinkering. We did the same here, as we were building the dual language program. We tried a few different ways until we kind of found something that got us the right outcomes and married with the teachers' practices. So, but it's hugely important. Language is a very high priority for us.
You touched upon preparing to disrupt, and that sounds very tittillating and exciting. At the same time, I'd like to sort of know up front what we're preparing.
Is your child going to jail? Is that what you're asking?
Can you sort of expand on that and maybe give us an example of something that you have in mind, like organizationally, institutionally?
Yeah. Well, what I want to be a regular practice at the middle school level is questioning how things are done. Right? I suspect that Eileen and her team will have an exercise through which they reinvent systems quite a bit. Governmental systems, financial systems, political systems, social systems, environmental systems. She'll use, continue to use those fantastic conceptual frameworks to guide it. So a lot of the decisions about exactly what will be addressed will be generated by the students themselves and what they care about and what they'd like to disrupt. But I would like to see them asking, is there a better way to do government, for example? And at the very least, have simulations where they explore new and better ways to create governmental systems that are healthier, more fair, truly fair, that take into account all that negative space that I mentioned before, right? Looking at the quiet parts of systems that are often the most oppressive. I would love for us to be the think tank where our middle schoolers start to build the belief and the idea that they can actually instigate change in places where we obviously need it. And I think that's a great place to start, right? It will certainly be, by the time we get to middle school, an even better place to start. The idea of technology and consumerism, right? AI will probably be a very big conversation for the middle schoolers, and disruption around AI, and for the purpose of checking it ethically and asking, is it being used for the right purposes? The technology that's being used now to clone will probably be very top of mind then. So disruptions in how we govern those activities, how we build and make those technologies available, right? So that's what I'm thinking. But the bottom line is that I want the anthem to be question how it's done. Don't take it anything for granted, right? Not for the purpose of just rebelling, right? Empty rebellion doesn't serve anybody, but with the intent of making things better. Is that specific enough?
Yes.
Yeah.
How do you make the experience sustainable over time? How do you make the school experience sustainable over time? Especially when before the class.
Sustainable in what way do you?
Perennial.
Oh, year-long school? No, sorry.
The future. For how many years?
How long will we be here?
Yes.
Oh, well, the lease is 48 years. I'm taking my vitamins with that in mind. You're talking to me. I mean, you know me. You know my answer is going to be similar to what I said to her.
It's always good to hear again.
Yeah. I mean, the lease is 48 years because I have a very long-term vision. I feel the same way about our school that I feel about college, which is that there will come a time, maybe it's 30 years from now or 50, all of this will be so different. So it's hard to predict that and how it's going to impact us in that way, but my commitment is lifetime. I left a very comfortable life to do this because I really believe that it needed to be done. So, am I answering what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
That's the question.
Okay. I think you were first. Then you. Yes.
So that being said, how is it going? How is the growth of the school? How is the community evolving? The school.
Well, I have two ways to answer that. The first is that my priority for growth could not be better, which was the culture that we were building. I purposefully chose to grow grade by grade. I call it low and slow. And it's counter to what most people would do when they're opening a new school. Like many of our peers who opened around the same time we did chose to fill all the way through 12th grade. And I've done that. And it's in some ways a better business model but it's not a better culture model. Because what you basically do is you spend about 10 years trying to convert people from their other practices to yours. It's very hard because culture is culture, right? Culture is the product of the dominant force of the population. So if most of your constituents are bringing other ideas, right, that are not necessarily aligned, it's very hard to stick with your mission and purpose. So I'm really happy about the thickness of our cultural belief system and alignment of philosophies. Most of the families in this school are behind these visionary ideas. So that, I could not be happier with that. It's much slower than I predicted. I mean, I had the middle school filled by now in my early projections. But New York is New York, you know? That's New York. And it's interesting because, to be really candid, there was a much more conservative, traditional reaction than I thought. I was really surprised by that. But New York is often a place that attracts people who love tradition. And, you know, the engines of this city are sometimes rooted mostly in tradition. So I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. But I believe so fervently there needs to be kind of wider-eyed look at the world, convince myself that it would grow a little faster. It didn't. But what we have, I couldn't be happier, honestly. And many of us have reflected on it over the last 5 years, and several parents have said to me they're happy that we didn't get big fast. People complain now about us getting big, which is hilarious, you know. First 2 years, the complaints were that we were too small, right? And then around year 3 and 4, I got complaints that we're too big, which tickles me a little bit, you know. I'm happy with it. It's steady. I would like to see the upper elementary fill faster. It's a very tough place to live. And I'm sure you can imagine why that is. It's hard to find good fit families at that stage of the game. It's hard to find families who want to uproot their child from their social experience at that phase of elementary school. But with each year, we see a change in that, and the middle school provides a shift as well. People who are interested in starting to really look at the middle school do consider coming in at elementary as a transition. So I think all that we can expect to see changes in that in the next year or so. But yeah, I think the only real pain point for me is I'd like to see the upper elementary grow a little more now that we've got a nice steady culture there. I'm sure the parents would like that too. What about you guys? How are you feeling about the growth? You can be honest. I'm always open to that conversation.
My kids are younger and they're in that age, the current second, first graders, both, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a triangle from age perspective, and as they come up, it builds out. That doesn't help you with upper grades, but
Yeah.
I think most of us fit into that bucket of the larger classes growing up with the schools. So
Yeah, and
for me, it's great. And
the
fine,
culture in
but
those
for you,
classes
it's-
is incredible, you know. So I'd like to see diversity. Most of you know that we have now a very active committee around that. We made a little bit of progress this year. I think we can still make some more. I didn't talk about it explicitly in this presentation, but part of the vision of the school is to exceed the sort of standard, quota system that most schools have around diversity. I don't see diversity that way. And anybody who watches demographics knows that the world is increasingly colorful, and I'm really excited about that. And I want to be a school that represents that. So it's another area that I'd like to see very specific kinds of growth in. Any other comments about growth or questions about growth? No? Off topic. Yes.
So 2 questions. One on diversity. How do you ensure diversity? There is more diversity at the administration and at the faculty level. And then the second question, nature. So I think that was the point I didn't quite hear. You started with nature, but not how can we ensure that the kids are exposed to nature, engaged with nature, to ensure emotional health or as a component of emotional health, but also climate change. Because if somebody doesn't love nature, they don't care about care less probably about climate change.
know what we're protecting, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so diversity. For me, diversity can mean a lot of things. My focus this year, frankly, is on families of color because I really want to be explicit about that. And sometimes to recruit a population that doesn't feel represented in your school, you've got to be very explicit. You've got to say the words and be open about that so that everybody's getting a very clear message about what it is that you're trying to do. Is there a particular area of diversity, or you just mean everything?
What you said sounds very good.
Okay, yeah. So I'm
stop
taking
there.
a pretty focused angle on it right now, and we've got incredible families. I don't know if anybody saw those social media posts from Local Moms earlier this year, but we had this phenomenal. Haiti was there. We had a few other families there. Just incredible representation. So I think it can be a lot better. So I'm working on that to try to improve that outreach.
What about teachers?
So teachers, right now, the direction that Eileen and I give to our, we call her the unicorn hunter. Okay, here's a typical conversation between me and Carolina, the unicorn hunter. I say, Carolina, we need a teacher of color who is fluent in Spanish and English, who has IB experience, probably, preferably at least 5 years, master's degree. And she's like, really, what else would you like? Because there's precisely one person in the world who has those skills. So we run up against that a lot. Eileen will tell you that we start almost every conversation with her re-emphasizing our desire to have more teachers of color and more men. So both of those areas are high priorities for us right now. They're just, there aren't a lot of them. And we're fighting with a lot of other schools to get them. And sometimes Dubai wins because they have a lot more money than we do. So, the international fairs are interesting because we're competing with some interesting other schools.
But I also look at other schools, and all schools have the same problem. Isn't it about starting earlier? It's not starting, who's in the market, but also go to the traditional colleges, doing the
Teachers College was
scholarships.
incredibly white, crazy white, and I couldn't believe how white it was, So it certainly starts with the training institutes, and frankly, even earlier. But I have a lot of problems to solve right now. I'm not going to mislead you. That's not at the top of my list. But it is a conversation. Our HR person, the unicorn hunter, is very aware that we want to increase the representation of teachers of color and men. So it's very top of mind for us in that process. We do everything we can. The priority is a good fit, regardless of what they look like. That's the top priority. But those things are important. Yes, absolutely. I think you were next.
So the nature part.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Well, to remember the slide about vision and execution and how important it is to have somebody sane checking the vision. So I think in the first year I said to Eileen, let's take them all upstate on a 5-night camping trip.
And they were 2 and 3 years old.
Yeah, I was talking about the preschoolers. Right?
I would sign up.
So, and I have at least one bizarre idea a day. A lot of them happen on like a riverboat, So something I'm still eager to see us implement. And I think we're almost at that point where we have critical mass of older children who can do it, is taking advantage of this unbelievable natural environment, that you can access just like that. I'm a regular hiker, camper, so I do it on a regular basis. But I do envision a really content-rich, purposeful experience that involves the Hudson and some experiences in the woods. And I think we're almost at that place where that is a reality, but it's in the conversation. I tried to get the 3-year-olds there the first year, and I didn't get them.
And the age bracket would be middle school or a little bit earlier, or late elementary?
No, I think we're almost at the place where the elementary school can pull that off, right? We're just at the sweet spot of school maturity. I think they've got the school without walls part down. They're really comfortable now. They've got their Subway Unlimited cards. The teachers are used to regularly navigating the city. So I think we're almost at the place where we can handle the scope of a project like that.
School in the wild.
Yeah. I'm with you, 100%. You want to do something on the side with me and like a parent trip? I'm completely down for that. So you just say the word. Okay, go ahead.
All right, disclaimer, you're not going to love the
Oh.
question. So I hope your vision for the future exists with the changing in college and all of that. But say it stays exactly the same. How do you think about testing and being able to do like SAT and ACT and take exams in college if it's not an integrated part of the current education? Because I even saw with my daughter taking like a gifted and talented test questioning the question. So, which I love, but at some point they may have to subscribe to some of that.
Yeah, well, I think I don't shy from testing. And then,
Well,
what's your schedule for testing?
We're January, we're doing the mapping academic progress, January and June, and then next September, January and June. And then the IESA, International Schools Assessment, is for 3rd grade and up, starting in February.
So what are the grade markers for testing?
A kindergarten for MAP and 3rd grade for ISA.
Yeah, so then these are both international tests. We love the design. They are.
But they're actually tests.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There's-
Well, they're done on a computer or iPad. They're not done with paper and pencil, but they're the same methodology of, testing.
All tests will be done.
And they normally perform better than the average too.
They always do.
Yeah, well, no, I'm very supportive of test taking as a skill set. I have always been. It's a reality of life. It will, I believe, become obsolete just because of the way the world is going to work. Blockchain will take over most things that testing relates to. Read my post on blockchain. But, okay, it will. It just will.
But not in time for our kids to opt out, though.
I'm sorry?
Not in time for our kids to opt out, though. I think that's gonna progress as they get older. It's not happening this year.
No,
But they are having practice now as a.
yeah, so we're going to keep doing them until we feel they're 100% irrelevant, and I suspect that's not in the near future. I'm very supportive of learning to take tests, and we, invite our kids to be very metacognitive about the tests and understand what they are and how they're designed. I think you should know. I think you should know what the science is behind this test. Question. Always, yes.
What does the continued future relationship with Quad look like as we expand? Because I noticed like this year they actually have a classroom at this level.
Really linking into the
Yeah.
school. Just this year. Next year, the middle school and the growth of the elementary will push them completely out. We had of this floor.
Of this
We
floor.
had the space.
Yeah.
We offered it to them because we knew that they wanted a couple of rooms to build their preschool. Eventually, Quad will need to move into a bigger space. They are actively looking at that. We actually have an option on another floor in this building, and for a couple of years we've talked to Quad about helping them utilize that space as a completely separate operation. I'm just sharing this with you. It's very conceptual at this point, but it's a possibility we've played with. Again, when I launched the school, I had a very aggressive growth plan. It didn't happen quite that way. Frankly, I'm thrilled to have Quad there because they pay rent, which allows me to grow slow. And I like what they do, and they don't compete with us. And their teachers are all trained in giftedness and special needs, which has not been horrible for us. So there have been some perks that are probably mostly behind the scenes in terms of our relationship with them. I know that traffic is an issue and confluence can sometimes be an issue, and I'm really grateful that parents have been tolerant, is that a good word, of that relationship. They're there as long as we don't need that floor. And then once our middle school gets ready, then we'll move into that floor. That's the plan, of course. Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate you coming. I hope this provided the insights you came to get. In January, I'm starting a monthly chat session. Maybe we'll call it a book club. Because I'm going to push this book and a discussion around what it introduces. I'd like to dive into it with you and talk about the implications it has for you and for your children. And of course, there are other, it's not the only book. There are others that I think we should be looking at. So in January, you'll see an announcement about a monthly meeting with me for the purpose of talking about the future and what it might look like. So I invite you to join me for that. I think you'll enjoy it. We're going to start with the one thing I wanted me to talk about today that I didn't talk about, which is the library. Oh. So I'm using the January one to seduce you into a conversation where we will start with the whole relationship of text and screen and how we will engage that conversation going forward, and it has implications for the library. So that will be January. There's a chapter on screens in the book, and so I'm going to start with that chapter.
Would that be a morning or like lunchtime or evening?
What do you think? Best times, morning, 9, or? Yeah, I might experiment with some different times.
Lunchtime.
Maybe I'll do both.
I don't know who works.
Hey, maybe I'll do both. Maybe I'll do morning version and evening
Because I know a
version.
lot of them more parents with
Yeah,
more
I'll do
traditional
both.
jobs have.
I'll do both.